Hi, I'm Mrs. Sheku. I am a math teacher here at Wood, and I am going to read chapter 15 of our book stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. This is a reminder. This is not a history book, but there are some names in this story that you've read in history books. Names you know, at least names you should know. It's okay if you don't know them because that's what this not history book is for. But I'm sure you know this one because his name definitely comes up every February. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, or as he was known when he was younger, Willie Du Bois, or as he was known when he was older, W.E.B. Du Bois, because nicknames are awesome when you have four names. He and his brother were raised in Massachusetts by a single mother who struggled to take care of them. Young Willie was hit with his first racial experience on an interracial playground when he was 10 years old. In the same way, many of us experience our first racial experiences. A girl refused a card from him. Okay, maybe this isn't the first racial experience for a lot of us, but a lot of us have experienced and will experience this kind of rejection. Some of us will experience it romantically. She, he, they just aren't that into you. And others of us, like the boys, will experience it as a direct result of our differences. In his case, his biggest differences was the color of his skin. That's all he needed to begin competing with his white classmates, determined to convince them that he was not different. At first, and if he was different, it was because he was better. W.E.B. Du Bois didn't know it at 10 years old, but he was going to become the king of uplift suasion, the king of I can do anything they can do, the king of if I'm like you, will you love me? Making him without a doubt the black king of assimilation, at least for a while. But we'll get to all that. For now, let's get into how Du Bois, as a teenager, decided, like Phyllis Wheatley, a few generations before him, that he wanted to go to Harvard, all white Harvard. But of course, that wasn't an option. So the townspeople, good white folks, pulled their money to send young Willie to Fisk University in Nashville, the best black school in the country and the top of the top when it came to teaching black people uplift suasion. Du Bois gobbled up the lessons on how to win white people over. And after his time at Fisk, Du Bois was able to put what he learned against assimilationism into practice. His dream had come true. He got into Harvard and earned a postgraduate degree. But not only did he get in, he did so well that he even spoke at his graduation. W.E.B. Du Bois had graduated from the best black school and the best white school, proving the capabilities of black people, at least in his own mind. Like I said, he was obsessed with keeping up with white people, running their race. But in his speech, he gave credit to Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis, saying that the Confederate president represented some kind of rugged individualism as opposed to the submissive nature of the slave. Yikes. Just as John Cotton and Richard Mather had planned several generations before, these ideas were coming out of Du Bois's Ivy League classroom, where he basically been fed the same narrative that Black people had been ruined by slavery, that they were irredeemable, in desperate need of fixing, but unfortunately unfixable, which meant he was obviously exceptional and an exception. But the root of his exceptionalism, his excellence, came from him being biracial. It must have. According to one of Du Bois's intellectual mentors, mulattoes were practically the same as any white man. Du Bois even went so far as to blame Black people for being mistreated, blamed them for fighting back, which meant he blamed them for being lynched. For instance, when white people challenged the 15th Amendment, the right to vote, by attaching an educational qualification to what was supposed to be a freedom for all, Du Bois, an educated man, found fault in the Black rage and found justification in the white response to the Black rage. because Black people were breaking the law by wanting white people to stop breaking the law, that they were wrong for wanting to live. And Du Bois wasn't the only Black man who believed that Black men were bad. Booker T. Washington, the shining star of the Tuskegee Institute, a college that cranked out Black brilliance, believed that even a dying Frederick Douglass did. And even a dying Frederick Douglass did. As a matter of fact, it took a young anti-racist Black woman to set these racist men straight. Ida B. Wells Barnett was an investigative journalist who did the necessary research to expose the inconsistencies in the data. In the pamphlet she published in 1892 called Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in All Its Phases, she found that from a sampling of 728 lynching reports, only a third of Black men lynched had actually ever been charged with rape, to say nothing of those who have been innocent of the charge. White men were lying about Black-on-white rape and hiding their own assaults of Black women. But the accusations of rape could make it easier for Southern white men to puff up and act maliciously, all in the name of defending the honor of white women. And Du Bois didn't challenge it. Do the crime, do the time. Don't do the crime, die. I know, W.E.B. Du Bois doesn't really sound that awesome, so let's talk about somebody else. Booker T. Washington, strike that thing I just said about him a few lines up. Actually, don't strike it because it's true, but there's more. Booker T. Washington wanted Blacks to focus on what would now be called blue-collar work. While Du Bois was rubbing elbows in the halls of the white academy, Washington was in the fields. Well, not really. Though he was the head of Tuskegee, he pushed for civil rights was more of a backdoor approach. After Frederick Douglass's death in 1895, Washington stepped into his place as the new leader of Black America. And though privately he supported empowerment, what he advised was that Black people publicly focused on lower pursuits, such as tending the fields, labor, common work, because he knew that that would be more acceptable to white people. Knew that they would eat it up. Why wouldn't they? A Black man saying post-slavery that Black people should be happy with the bottom because at least the bottom is a dignified start. For white people, that sounded perfect, but because it meant there was a greater chance Black people would stay out of positions of power and therefore would never actually have any. Oof. I guess Booker T. Washington really doesn't sound that great either. Du Bois believed in being like white people to eliminate threats so that Black people could compete. Washington believed in eliminating thoughts of competition so that white people wouldn't be threatened by Black sustainability. And there were Black people who believed both men, because though we're critiquing their assimilationist ideas in this moment, they were thought leaders of their time. The wildest part about these two men is that they didn't get along. They were like the Biggie and Tupac of their day. Hope you know who they are. Or maybe Michael Jackson and Prince, them too. Maybe Malcolm and Martin. You better. They believed in the destination, which was Black freedom. But regarding the journey there, they couldn't have disagreed more. Du Bois, a hyper-intellectual golden child. Washington, the man of the people. Du Bois wrote The Souls of Black Folk, which intellectualized who Black people really were. Washington wrote Up from Slavery, which outlined the diligence, faith, and fortitude it took and takes to survive in America, coupled with the idea of the white savior. Stories featuring white people having anti-racist epiphanies or moments of empathy resulting in the saving of Black people, white savior stories, were becoming a fixture in American media, and the problem with them wasn't that there weren't any good white people in the real world. It's that the stories gave the illusion that there were more than they really were. That white people in general were, once again, the savior of Black people. Because of that, partially, Up from Slavery was a hit. And Du Bois couldn't take it. He couldn't stomach the fact that Washington was in the spotlight shining. Washington was even invited to the White House once Theodore Roosevelt got into office. While the always sophisticated Du Bois publicly criticized Washington, calling him old-fashioned for being so accommodating to white people, for presenting the idea that Black people should find dignity through work and that no education was complete without the learning of a trade. Meanwhile, his own book, The Souls of Black Folk, set out to establish the mere fact that Black people were complex human beings. It was in this work that Du Bois introduced the idea of double consciousness, a two-ness, a self that is Black and a self that is American. And from this, he fashioned a sample set of Black people who sat at the converging point. Black people to be positive representatives of the race. Like Blackness, good Blackness was a brand. Du Bois wanted these Black people to be the ambassadors of that brand. 1 in every 10th, he believed, were worthy of the job. He called them the talented 10th. Though Du Bois was against accommodating white people, at least that's what he criticized Washington for, he was still the same man fighting for white approval. He still believed that he could think and dress and speak racism away. No matter what he said about Washington's antics and accommodation, W.E.B. Du Bois was in fact still the emperor of uplift suasion. But Du Bois would get a wake-up call, a slap in the face even, not from Washington, but from a man named Franz Bois, who had immigrated to America from Germany in 1886 because of anti-Jewish persecution. Bois had become one of America's most prominent anthropologists and had been drawing similarities between the way his people were mistreated in Germany and the way Black people were being mistreated in America, with each nation justifying the treatment by saying the persecuted group was naturally inferior. Same story, different book. But in 1906, when Du Bois asked Bois to come speak at Atlanta University, where he was teaching, he had no idea what he was in for. Bois affirmed that the idea that Black people were naturally inferior, or even that they've been made inferior from slavery, was false, and that all one needed to do to prove this was dig through the history of Black people before they got to America. Black people had a history, and that history, an African history, wasn't one of inferiority. Instead, it was one full of glorious empires like those of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, full of intellects and innovators. Du Bois's head blew right off his shoulders. At least that's the way I imagine it. Either way, his mind and all the white mumbo jumbo he consumed had started to change. But the intellectual high wouldn't last long, because by the end of the same year, Black people helped the Republicans regain the House of Representatives in the midterm elections. And as soon as they did, Roosevelt, the president who invited Booker T. Washington to his house, the most popular president among Black people ever, kicked a bunch of Black soldiers out of the army without any money. 167 soldiers to be exact. A dozen of them had been falsely accused of murdering a bartender and wounding a cop in Texas. These soldiers of the 25th Infantry Regiment were a point of pride for Black America. For them to be mistreated as fighters for a country that had been fighting against them their entire lives was a blow to the Black psyche. And just like that, Roosevelt was seen as a backstabber by Black people. And because Booker T. Washington was Roosevelt's guy, his man, his Black friend, Washington also had to feel the wrath when the president hurt his people. Due to the social blow Booker T. Washington took because of his familiar and friendly history with Roosevelt, Du Bois's talented 10th rose in influence. And that is the end of chapter 15.